Hello everyone, here is Orit from Tel Aviv, Israel, and I would like to present you my research about specialized school in Israel. So this study researches the key aspects of the establishment and development of specialized school from 1985 till 2019 in Israel. This is done through the analysis of education policy issue in this context when there is an underlying conflict between the values of equity versus choice. The phenomenon of establishment of specialized schools develop with an affinity to and against the background of the development of market or quasi-market trends in education in both the Western world and in Israel at the beginning of the 80s. These quasi-market arenas are characterized by combined public and private sectors and translate it into allowing choice between public school so as not to encourage the private sector. This phenomenon creates challenges for the public education system in Israel, which is characterized by a diverse and multifaceted population mix and gaps in achievement compared to OECD countries. The professional literature describes the tension between the choice and the market in education and equity and equal opportunity. This debate, which reflects a fundamental conflict of values, is valid within an accepted theoretical framework in the domain found in a triangle composed of three dominant values: equity, efficiency, and liberty. The reciprocal relation between these three values are described as ongoing conflict, with each of the values competing against the other two in the political environment. In order to examine whether formulated policy with regard to the phenomenon described harms social justice, it was decided to make use a critical methodology from the field of qualitative research. For this purpose, a research paradigm based on the critical hermeneutic methodology approach. The policy documents that include in this research are as follows. In light of the 5 transcripts of semi-structured deep interviews conducted with the senior officer in the education system. Here are the 7 work steps, and I would like to emphasize the 5th, that coding access, creating codes in light of the research questions, and then creating themes, and then organizing themes around 2 organizing axes that answer the research questions. And the research questions: to what extent, if any, does education policy in the context of Israeli specialized school promote equity? To what extent, if any, does education policy in the context of the Israeli specialized school promote choice? Are there additional actors in the policy sphere? If so, who are they? What are the different voices of these actors? What are the tensions between them? What, if at all, do they merge in education policy in the context of Israeli specialized school? In what way, if any, do these voices merge disharmoniously with education policy in the context of specialized school in Israel? The methodology goes by data analysis method that follow by 2 steps content analysis. The first step, identification and definition of 2 main themes: evolutionary theme that is composed of 4 sub-themes through which it is possible to analyze policy formulated in this or in its movement our 2 poles, equity versus choice. And the second theme is the conceptual theme that trap the additional actors in the policy sphere. The second stage goes and map and placing the findings from the 2 themes and analyzing them according to Schmidt's 5-stage model. The model presents value critical policy analysis. Here is the model, the 5 stages of the analysis of the model according to Schmidt. Actually, The debate was analyze it, identify the issue underlying the phenomenon, describe the social or political context of the phenomenon, describing the debate regarding the phenomenon, and a critical analysis of the values and the arguments underlying the debate. And finally, drawing conclusion and formulating recommendation. Here we can see the work model of the investigation of the phenomenon. Here we can see till here the first step, and here we can see the second step. The two themes, the conceptual theme about the actors, and the evolutionary theme and the sub-themes. The development of the phenomenon, the development of the definition in the budgetary aspect, and reference to the concept of absence. From all these, we found 35 findings, intermediate conclusion, and the second step of analysis. And then in the end, discussion and summary. The thematic analysis gave rise to 35 findings, with the main finding presented here. The first finding, looking for the context and the reasons for the growth of the phenomenon. We can see the budget cuts across the board in the 80s that leads to a pressure from parents to finance hours that were reduced, that leads to a drafting of regulation for extracurricular program and their formal application in the system, that leads to a decline in the influence of the Ministry of Education and rise in a funding by household of education service. In parallel and at the same time, we can see a process that leads to a direct election of mayors of the local authority, and that leads to a high level of dependence on satisfaction of residents, including parents. These two processes goes to make a coalition of interest of parents and local authority. All this lead to the foundation of specialized schools. Late and early period in the policy arena. Specialized school emerged and operated as such before the drafting and publication of an official definition. The budgetary aspect. Budgeting, the specialization of specialized school, is based solely on budgeting that does not come from the Ministry of Education, but rather from additional sources: local authority budgets, parental payment, and donations. The actor teams found that parents and the local authority constitute two dominant groups of actors in developing policy arena, among whom a coalition of interest is developed. Balance of power analysis. Specialized schools were among the first occasions in which parental choice and involvement were actually implemented, and there was a high level of satisfaction among parents and educational staff due to this trend that influenced the improvement of education. This finding highlights the fact that parents and the local authority have accumulated strength as a result of this phenomenon, which has been proven to be particularly successful. Now we go to two conclusions. So the first conclusions: the reason for their establishment as well as characterization of bottom-up phenomenon indicate the decline of the central government's power in parallel with the rise of the power of additional actors, local authority and parents, whose entry has influenced the policy sphere and turned it into a reactive rather than a proactive policy. This finding presents a situation in which the value of choice and parental autonomy outweighed the value of equity. The second conclusion: their late definition of establishment was identified as deficient and sometimes ambiguous. The lack of clarity regarding key concepts in their definition, the administrative component that addressed the registration areas, and the issue of the budget component, which should have clearly addressed the issue of financing specialized school, lead to a situation of disinformation, incoherency and high level of freedom of action taken by the actors in relation to the interpretation of what is permissible and forbidden with regard to the issue. This conclusion indicates that the value of parental choice has gained greater weight and even contradicts the equity value. The third conclusion, their establishment preceded their definition by many years, enabling other actors in the policy arena to establish different operating norms that were not always in line with the regulation and permits of official education policy. This is in contrast to there being locomotives of pedagogical changes and innovation, a finding that leads to two main conclusions. With regard to the measure of power and the influence of the enterprising actor group, with regards to the degree of ambivalence in relation to the establishment of specialized school by the central government. These conclusions reflect a picture of varying power relations between the central government and groups of additional actors, where the leading value is value of parental autonomy, which overcomes the value of equal of opportunity. The main conclusion in the budgetary context is based on the finding that indicates that the actual act relating to the financing of specialized schools preceded the written directive, which was found to be late, ambiguous, and separate from the definition. The different group of actors who accumulate power from the success of the phenomenon and who were exclusive with regard to the supplementary budget and could establish exceptional collection norm due to the lack of enforcement and policy of turning a blind eye. In addition, the permit received from the Ministry of Education regarding the additional collection through donation indicate that this has contributed to the establishment of practice that enable private money to enter the system without any control. Here we can see the summary of the results of analysis of the phenomenon and its development. So it can be recognized that the factor policy that has shaped the phenomenon of the establishment of specialized school in Israel is that these schools are a particularly successful education model, but it has also been found that they also give a distinct advantage to established strata. In light of this, the question arises how and in what way it is desirable to narrow the gap discovered between de jure policy and de facto policy, within a wider context of providing a framework for the phenomenon under study as a derivative of neoliberal policy based on outlook of marketization and competition. According to BenDavid-Hadar, as long as neoliberal assumptions demand cuts in central budgets and giving local actors more independent in policy formulation, as revealed in this study, the evident implication of learning society will not be achieved. So those the main aspiration of policymaker, to work to balance the tension between de jure and de facto policy by rest on Rawls' theory of justice, which propose to resolve it by two ways: by the redistribution of wealth, with the source being monies raised from taxes, while limiting sources of supplementary budget through parental tuition fees. And the second one, by affirmative allocation for talented individual from disadvantaged population. So the recommendation for policymaker. The first recommendation, there is a need to reconsider the education legislative system in Israel, that it can provide a solution to global and local development in the field of education. One of the primary conclusions of this study is that there must be new legislation that will provide a response to issue of privatization of education. It has been found that present legislation is made up of patchwork and cannot deal with the reality on the ground as reflected in this study. The second recommendation is to redefine public specialized education in Israel in light of regulation process ongoing in this context in recent years. It would be desirable that the redefinition take into account the diversity of social characteristics and make decisions critically in regards to them, with the right of new public specialized education to exist being conditional on its equitable distribution in society. Thank you very much.